In the breathless heat of a courtroom showdown, the glare of camera lights locks onto two opposing figures. Jasmine Crockett, the fiery young face of the Democrats, and John Cornyn, the seasoned Republican senator, wielding both power and hidden machinations. One side brandishes classified documents, proving the new electoral map is a tool to silence black voters. The other, in a chillingly measured tone, accuses their opponent of betrayal for abandoning the state and daring to challenge the rules imposed by his faction. The courtroom falls silent, the media erupts, and millions of Texans watch intently. In this legal battlefield, will justice side with political power, or with the community's push to the margins of democracy? The hearing that morning opened like a clash, fiercer than any power struggle on the Senate floor. The cold, white glow of television cameras cast stark light, capturing every tense wrinkle on John Cornyn's face and the blazing resolve in Jasmine Crockett's eyes. The room buzzed with whispers, but when the judge's gavel fell, the air seemed to compress into a taut silence, as if a single loud breath could shatter it. This was no ordinary hearing. It had become a political arena, where every word, every gesture, even a fleeting glance was dissected, amplified, and weaponized as evidence for two opposing camps. On one side, Republicans framed the redistricting map as a necessary reform to ensure democratic order. On the other hand, Democrats decried it as a brazen plot to strangle the voices of black and minority communities. Jasmine Crockett stood tall, her dark hair neatly tied back to her face, radiating tension, but unwavering resolve. She knew she faced not just Cornyn, a senator steeped in cunning, but an entire machinery of power pulling strings behind the scenes. Under the blinding lights, she raised a thick dossier, her voice sharp and deliberate, each word landing like a hammer. This map is not reform. It is systematic disenfranchisement, a political tool designed to erase the rightful representation of millions of Texas citizens. Across the room, Cornyn didn't flinch. Arms crossed, he leaned toward the microphone, his voice low and deliberate, as if delivering a verdict. Ms. Crockett and her allies have betrayed us. Fleeing the state, abandoning their duties, breaking quorum that is not the act of a lawmaker loyal to the Constitution. It is a rejection of responsibility to the people. The room erupted. Reporters typed frantically, while others zoomed their lenses to capture every flicker of expression. This was no mere personal feud. It was a collision of two visions of democracy. The word betrayal from Cornyn cut into Jasmine like a blade, but she refused to falter. Her eyes locked onto his, defiant and icy. She responded, her voice dropping to a steely calm. Senator Cornyn, betrayal is not defending the constitutional rights of voters. Betrayal is using the law as a tool to serve one faction. Betrayal is letting your power be swayed by energy corporations instead of the will of the people. For a moment, Cornyn paused, the corner of his mouth twitching into a sardonic smile. He tilted his head, as if dismissing her accusations as the buzz of a Texas summer cicada. But his eyes, cold and sharp, betrayed that he did not underestimate his opponent. The judge signaled both sides to present their cases. Cornyn seized the moment, opening his documents and reading aloud Texas constitutional clauses, citing precedents that branded quorum breaking as an act against parliamentary process. His voice boomed authoritative, as if the law itself bent to his will. But Jasmine didn't stay silent. She countered, citing constitutional provisions that allowed lawmakers to leave sessions when the law's essence was warped into a tool of majority tyranny. Her words carried not just legal weight, but the fury of millions of voters. The room held its breath, as if two hammers were striking the same anvil, sparking a blaze of political fire. Outside, millions of Texans watched live on television. News channels flashed red banners, Crockett vs. Cornyn, historic battle over election map. A journalist whispered, half joking, half serious, "If democracy is a play, this is its climax." The quip spread, drawing nods. For truly no one knew whether they were witnessing justice in action or just another act in the theater of politics. Cornyn lowered his voice again, targeting Jasmine personally. He referenced her role in the previous year's quorum break, implying she was a chronic deserter. "A lawmaker cannot place themselves above the legislature," he declared. "The law cannot be defined by emotion." Jasmine clenched her fists, steady despite the attack. She knew he was painting her as a symbol of chaos to discredit her. But she also understood that his personal attacks only strengthened her position. She was the lone voice daring to stand up. She opened her dossier, raising a map crisscrossed with red lines. Pointing to specific districts, she explained, "This is how they pack black voters into a single district, rendering their votes nearly meaningless. This is how they carve up Latino communities into fragments, ensuring they can never elect their representatives. This is not a coincidence, it is intent." The room stirred. A few clapped softly, quickly hushed. Cornyn smirked. "Numbers don't lie, Miss Crockett." Jasmine shot back. "Exactly, Senator. That's why they expose you. This isn't math. It's manipulation. And you're legitimizing it under the guise of the Constitution." The tension stretched taut like a guitar string about to snap. The judge's gavel fell repeatedly to restore order, but the heat in the room was uncontrollable. This was no longer just a legal debate. It was a battle for survival, for honor, for power. In Cornyn's eyes gleamed cold confidence. He believed the machinery behind him was strong enough to crush his opponent. In Jasmine's eyes burned fierce resolve, a reckless flame. She knew she might lose, but silence would mean millions of voters losing their voice forever. The hearing paused amid a frenzy of cameras and reporters' questions. No one knew the outcome, but all understood this was only the opening act of a long, brutal fight, where justice and power might not stand on the same side. The story rewinds a few months. In the sweltering Texas summer, the Capitol was hotter still ablaze with fierce debates over the redistricting map. On paper, it was just lines, and numbers seemingly technical. But everyone knew those lines hid a power strategy that could shape the state's political future for decades. The Texas Senate committee, dominated by Republicans, swiftly passed the new map. Its lines were like cold blades, slicing Black and Latino communities into fragments, cramming them into tiny districts to ensure their political voices were reduced to faint echoes. This so-called electoral reform was gerrymandering so blatant that anyone versed in law could see its intent. Democrats knew defeat loomed if they stayed in the Capitol. Watching the unjust map be rubber-stamped amid majority applause was unbearable. With no other option, they took a drastic step. They fled the state. By breaking quorum, the minimum number needed for a vote, they halted the legislative process, turning the Capitol into an empty battlefield. It wasn't impulsive. It was their only tactic to slow the tidal wave of power, drowning dissent. But to Republicans, it was rebellion. They called it desertion, betrayal, and a trampling of the Constitution. Amid this fury, John Cornyn emerged as a commanding general. He didn't draft the map, but his influence and stature in the party turned every decision into a mandate. He knew a Democratic victory would set a dangerous precedent, shaking his faction's grip on power. More crucially, he knew the web of interests backing him. Energy corporations pouring millions into political campaigns demanded stability to control policy. The new map was their long-term safeguard. For Cornyn, this wasn't just about defeating the opposition. It was about cementing permanent power. In closed-door meetings, Cornyn's voice was low and commanding. We can't let them escape forever. If needed, I'll call in the FBI to track every one of them." His words cut like a knife. Some aides hesitated using the FBI to hunt lawmakers pushed constitutional boundaries. But Cornyn's eyes held no room for doubt. To him, the law could bend as long as the goal was secured. Days later, leaks surfaced. The FBI was tasked with locating Democratic lawmakers hiding in other states. The nation was stunned. Republican supporters cheered, calling it restoring justice. Democrats raged, seeing it as proof the government had turned a national security agency into a political weapon. In the chaos, Jasmine Crockett became target number one. She wasn't just a quorum breaker. She was the loudest voice appearing on TV to denounce the map as a plot to kill democracy. Cornyn knew to crush the opposition he had to break Jasmine first. That night, in a temporary hotel room in Illinois, Jasmine scrolled through news feeds. Her face flashed across screens paired with red captions. FBI hunts Democratic lawmaker. Crockett, named. Her heart pounded, but her eyes burned with resolve. She knew she'd become a symbol, and symbols don't retreat. Questions raced through her mind. Would the FBI cross constitutional lines to drag her back to Texas? Would the public buy Cornyn's betrayal narrative? Would her Democratic allies hold firm under this crushing pressure? Cornyn, meanwhile, appeared on TV with a cold smile, his voice firm. We cannot let a small group derail the legislative process. Democracy doesn't allow anyone to shirk responsibility. But his eyes betrayed more than talk of duty. He was signaling he held the power to pull back any dissenter, no matter where they hid. The media exploded with conflicting takes. Some analysts quipped, if Cornyn sees democracy as a game, the FBI becomes his playground police. Conservatives fired back. No law allows lawmakers to flee to obstruct progress. Crockett and her allies must pay. In this war, legal truth was buried under layers of political rhetoric. Republicans cited clauses on legislative duty. Democrats invoked constitutional rights to break quorum as legitimate resistance. Both wielded the Constitution, but each turned it into a weapon for their own battlefield. In a quiet corner, Jasmine jotted down every flaw in Cornyn's arguments. She knew outrage alone wouldn't win. She needed concrete evidence to prove he was abusing power. But as she prepared, the shadow of power loomed ever heavier. Outside, her hotel reporters camped day and night, as if besieging a suspect. Inside the Texas Capitol, her chair and those of her allies sat empty, a defiant silence. The battle had just begun. But it was no longer just about an election map. It was about the meaning of democracy, the limits of power, and whether a senator could turn the FBI into a tool for political ambition. Cornyn didn't wait for Democrats to regroup. He launched a preemptive strike, unleashing a political storm across Texas. At a meticulously staged press conference, he lowered his voice, each word dripping with accusation. The Democratic lawmakers who fled the state did so not for ideals, not for voters. They were paid. They were bribed to betray their duties. This isn't politics. It's outright corruption. The charge landed like a boulder, sending shockwaves. Within hours, conservative media pounced. Headlines screamed, "Scandal Democrats, paid to flee Jasmine Crockett, traitor in disguise." Red captions raced across cable news, slicing into Jasmine's credibility. She turned on the TV in her small office, frozen as her image appeared alongside stacks of fake cash. The anchor intoned, a young politician who promised to protect democracy is now accused of selling out for personal gain. The narrative was crafted to sow doubt if she was innocent. Why did she run? The FBI stepped in, adding weight to the blow. Agents appeared in news reports, stating they were seriously reviewing bribery allegations. No one could confirm Cornyn's direct involvement, but all knew the FBI wouldn't act without pressure from the highest echelons of power. In a sleepless night, Jasmine sat at a desk, piled with documents. Her eyes, once fiery, now held deep worry. Questions pounded in her mind. If the public believes these lies, will anyone hear the truth? If the FBI fabricates a case, do I have any escape? This wasn't just a legislative fight. It was an assault on her honor. Once trust crumbled, she'd lose everything. In the Texas Capitol, Republicans seized the moment, threatening to expel quorum-breaking lawmakers. Discipline must be upheld. Defiance will be removed, they declared. The air in the legislature was thick with tension, like gunpowder awaiting a spark. Cornyn, with the calm of a seasoned politician, appeared relentlessly before the public. He claimed he took no pleasure in harsh measures, but insisted the law cannot be trampled. His words sounded righteous, but beneath them lay cruel irony. He knew the public was wavering, and he was ready to fan the flames to capsize the Democratic ship. Conservative media like a choir churned out in-depth analyses. Self-styled experts repeated that fleeing to break quorum is illegal, and shady funding fueled this betrayal. Some mocked Jasmine as the drama queen of the legislature, dismissing her ideals as extremism. In the public's eyes, Jasmine's image began to distort, smeared beyond recognition. Even some supporters wavered. In American politics, once doubt is sown, it grows faster than any evidence. Jasmine knew the danger. In a closed-door meeting with allies, she spoke bluntly. This isn't a legislative game anymore. This is a political assassination. Her voice was hoarse, but her eyes blazed with resolve. Inside, she felt like she was walking a tightrope. Each step risked a fall, but stopping meant surrender. Her mind wrestled strike back now or wait for the right moment. Acting too soon without enough evidence could weaken her. Waiting too long could hand her credibility to her enemies. Cornyn, meanwhile, didn't hide his satisfaction. In a private meeting with advisors, he smirked. Sometimes you don't need to attack votes, just honor. Once the public doubts the opponents already half defeated, his words rang like a victory proclamation. Pressure mounted. Hashtags spread online Tuanturak or Crockett bribed just Texas betrayal. The public was steered fixating on allegations rather than the battle's core. The power brokers behind Cornyn smiled. They didn't need to appear. The scandal spread would sink Jasmine. Amid this, the hearing paused under public pressure. The judge announced a need to review additional evidence. Media pounced chaotic hearing. Bribery. Evidence under scrutiny. Texans were lost in an information storm, unable to discern truth from manipulation. Jasmine sat behind closed doors, feeling the crushing weight on her shoulders. She knew this was a do-or-die moment. Without a timely counterattack, her career and Texas's Democratic future would collapse under Cornyn's vicious blows. But she also knew that to fight back, she needed more than words, undeniable evidence. In her heart, a question tolled like a bell. Could she turn the tide, or would she become the next victim in this ruthless game of power? Amid the media siege, Jasmine was no longer just a politician. She was the focal point of every camera headline and venomous comment from her opponents. Cable news replayed her image endlessly interspersed with flashing red text. Crockett suspected of bribery, Democrats in disarray. Each time the TV flickered on, she saw herself cast as the villain in a drama scripted by Republicans. But Jasmine knew rushing into battle now would mean annihilation. The Republicans had set the stage, tuned the orchestra, and rallied the crowd. Appearing at their climax would make her a caricature in their play. So she stepped back, not to retreat, but to quietly prepare a counterstrike that could shift the game. In secretive meetings, Jasmine rallied allies. Not all Democrats dared stand with her. Many feared the bribery scandal's stain. But loyal faces remained those who believed that if Cornyn won, Texas's democracy would be a hollow shell. She sought out constitutional lawyers, seasoned minds who'd fought gerrymandering before. In tense discussions, they dissected constitutional clauses and legal precedents. They aimed to prove Cornyn had gone too far, turning the FBI into a political weapon, violating the separation of federal and state powers. "Where's the evidence?" one lawyer asked sharply. Jasmine's lips tightened. That question haunted her for weeks. All arguments, all theories were mere whispers without concrete proof. Then, like fate, the first piece fell into place. A leaked internal email revealed Cornyn directing advisors to push the FBI to expand its authority. The wording wasn't blatant, but it showed he'd crossed legal lines. Reading it, Jasmine felt a chill down her spine. This was what she needed: proof of power abused. She and her allies dug deeper. Classified files, forgotten notes, seemingly harmless documents pieced together a clear picture. Cornyn not only knew, but orchestrated the FBI's use as a political cudgel. But the real shock came from within. Late one night, as advisors reviewed who'd accessed sensitive files, a name surfaced, and it stopped Jasmine's heart. Her former aide who'd stood by her through her first campaign, whom she'd trusted implicitly, had secretly fed information to Cornyn in exchange for a promised role in the Republican machine if they prevailed. Jasmine sat stunned. Years of trust, countless late nights crafting speeches now reduced to raw betrayal. A bitter question echoed. Did I hand the knife to the one who'd stabbed me in the back? Allies around her raged, some demanding the traitor be exposed immediately. But Jasmine stopped them. Her eyes were red, but her voice was firm. Exposing this now would be shooting ourselves in the foot. Cornyn would laugh as we tore each other apart. Keep it quiet. Use this at the right moment. That night alone in her office, the dim light cast shadows on her weary face. She thought of her remaining allies. Were they truly loyal, or waiting to bargain with Cornyn? Betrayal made her cautious, even cold. Every move now balanced on the edge of political survival or ruin. Outside, the media roared, naming her daily. Republicans leaked more anonymous sources claiming bribery evidence. The fickle public grew more confused. But Jasmine stayed silent, preparing her counterblow. In her heart, she vowed, "I'm not just fighting for myself. I'm fighting for millions whose voices are being stolen. If I fall, they lose everything." That thought turned betrayal's pain into resolute fire. On the other side, Cornyn reveled in his edge. At a private donor dinner, he raised a glass with a cold smile. "Rest assured, Crockett's just a shadow now. Soon she'll vanish from Texas's political map, just like her communities will vanish from the electoral map." The room erupted in applause, drunk on power. Jasmine didn't hear those words, but she felt their contempt in Cornyn's every move. It fueled her resolve. If this is a game of power, I'll play a move he won't expect. Finally, with enough evidence pieced together and the traitor identified, Jasmine allowed a bitter, determined smile. She knew the time to strike back was near. And this time, she wouldn't just defend herself, she'd expose an entire system of deceit to the public's light. The press conference room was packed, dozens of cameras trained on the podium, where Jasmine Crockett stepped forward with unyielding resolve. The air was heavy, as if awaiting a verdict rather than a speech. After weeks of relentless attacks and bribery accusations today, she chose to strike back. Jasmine opened her briefcase, pulling out neatly printed documents and placing them before the microphone. Her voice rang out slow, but razor sharp. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not here to offer excuses. I'm here with the truth. These are multi-million-dollar contracts from a major energy corporation funneled directly to key figures behind the new electoral map. In return, they were guaranteed long-term control over Texas energy policy. This map isn't reform. It's a blank check Republicans signed for their corporate masters." Cameras flashed like gunfire. The room buzzed as reporters scrambled, hands shooting up. Jasmine locked eyes with the cameras, her gaze ablaze. They call me a traitor. But the real betrayal is selling out millions of voters for power and money. Her words detonated like a bomb in Texas's political heart. Evening news screamed, Crockett drops, bombshell evidence, shady contracts behind election map. The red captions are no longer tied to bribery accusations, but to public outrage. Cornyn didn't hesitate. Hours later, he appeared on TV, still calm, even mocking. His voice dipped, laced with sarcasm. Ms. Crockett has made herself a national security threat. By leaking classified documents, by slandering the legislature, she's crossed the line. This isn't about a map anymore. It's about destabilizing democracy. Cornyn used his signature tactic, turned the accuser into the accused. Instead of addressing the contracts, he attacked how Jasmine revealed them, branding her actions as threats to national security and social instability. From a veteran senator's lips, such words became nails driven into public opinion. But this time, the tide didn't follow his lead. Jasmine's concrete evidence was too clear to ignore. Independent media and analysts began asking, if there's nothing to hide, why doesn't Cornyn address the contracts? The question spread, piercing his defenses. To the public, this was no longer a clash between a young lawmaker and a seasoned senator. It was a portrait of a power system manipulating laws and elections. They saw not just Cornyn and Jasmine, but a tangled web of interests behind them. Texas erupted into a storm. Thousands protested, hoisting signs. Whose map? Our map, don't sell democracy. The scenes forced national media to take notice, pushing the story to the front pages. Cornyn stuck to his strategy, appearing as the guardian of order, insisting Crockett broke the law and that her accusations were the excuses of a loser. He avoided mentioning the corporations or contracts, a silence that fueled suspicion. Inside, Jasmine felt both relief and heightened tension. Relief because she'd flipped the board, forcing Cornyn to defend. Tension because she knew he never surrendered easily. By calling her a national security threat, he was paving a path to paint her as a federal outlaw. As she feared, the case escalated to the federal courts. Lawsuits and petitions demanded investigations into whether Cornyn violated the Constitution by weaponizing the FBI and whether Jasmine breached security by leaking documents. Texas's story was no longer confined to state borders. It was a national battle watched by all of America. In a quiet moment, Jasmine stood before a mirror staring at her reflection. Her face was gaunt from sleepless nights, her eyes shadowed, but her gaze burned bright. She whispered like a vow, "If exposing the truth has a price, I'll pay it." But history won't say I stayed silent. Meanwhile, in a closed Washington meeting, Cornyn stared coldly at his advisors. His fingers tapped the table, each beat like a countdown. "We're not fighting for a map. We're fighting for permanent power. Don't let Crockett turn this into a symbol of resistance. Make her a criminal." No one dared respond, but fear flickered in their eyes. For the first time, Cornyn wasn't in absolute control. For the first time, the public wasn't fully swayed by his words. And for the first time, a young lawmaker named Jasmine Crockett had shaken the impregnable wall of power. The courtroom was packed with reporters spilling into the hallways, microphones and cameras aimed at the heavy wooden doors, where in moments a ruling would shape Texas's political fate. No one spoke loudly. The silence was thick like a storm holding its breath. The judge entered. The room rose, then sat in unison. In that moment, Jasmine felt her heart stop. She gripped her dossier, hands ice cold. Cornyn sat opposite, composed, as ever, a faint, enigmatic smile playing on his lips. The judge flipped through pages, his voice resounding. After reviewing all evidence, this federal court concludes the new electoral map passed by the Texas Senate Committee violates the Constitution. Specifically, it breaches the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment and contravenes provisions of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The map intentionally diminishes the political representation of minority communities, particularly Black and Latino voters. Therefore, the court declares the map invalid. The room exploded like thunder. Reporters leapt up, cameras flashed wildly, voices surged. Jasmine closed her eyes, a single tear tracing her cheek, but her face remained resolute. She knew this wasn't just her victory. It was a triumph for millions silenced. Cornyn, for the first time in months, couldn't mask the tension in his face. His eyes darkened, then quickly regained composure. He stood, adjusted his tie, and strode out without glancing at Jasmine, a gesture of pride and a warning he wasn't defeated. Headlines erupted. Texas election map: ruled unconstitutional Crockett wins historic victory. Crowds outside the courthouse cheered, waving signs supporting Jasmine. She stepped out, her face radiant under the camera lights. Her voice trembled but was firm. "This isn't my victory. This is democracy's victory." The crowd roared, chanting, "Democracy, democracy." In that moment, Jasmine felt one with them, but she also sensed the fragility of the triumph. Justice had prevailed, but it was a thin shield against countless spears waiting to strike. Cornyn, though disgraced, still held his Senate seat. The web of power energy corporations, massive donors, seasoned political allies didn't vanish with one ruling. They merely retreated to plot anew. In a closed meeting post-trial, Cornyn sat with arms crossed, his gaze icy. A young advisor stammered, "Have we lost, sir?" He gave a joyless smile. "We haven't lost. One map's gone, but the game's not over. Crockett thinks she's won, but wait. She's just stepped into deeper waters, unaware of the sharks circling." Back in her office, Jasmine sank into her chair, exhaling deeply. Allies rushed to congratulate her, but she only nodded. Her eyes held joy mixed with dread. She remembered the traitor who fed Cornyn information, still unexposed publicly, a lingering shadow. Today she won in court, but tomorrow Cornyn and his system would strike again. Texas's political air remained stifling. After days of celebrating the victory, the media asked, "Who will draw the new map? Will Republicans return with new tricks?" The questions loomed like dark clouds over Justice's faint light. Jasmine stood by her window, gazing at the crowd still gathered outside. She whispered to herself, "Democracy survived this time." But what about next? Somewhere in the shadows, Cornyn was surely planning. And Texas, a land accustomed to storms, braced for a new tempest of power. The trial ended with justice affirmed, but its aftermath was heavier than any verdict. A partial victory, a fragile peace, and an unanswered question. Could this brittle democracy withstand the next wave of schemes, or would it be swept away in the endless vortex of power?